join you in Odessa for this important conversation. And I'm glad to be back in Ukraine with friends that I've enjoyed and benefited from during my numerous trips to Ukraine, this great country. I had the privilege of visiting Ukraine and Odessa in 2022, shortly after the war began, and relatively few weeks after we were told by major military leaders in the United States that if indeed Russia invaded Ukraine, though I say they invaded Ukraine in 2014, that they would roll over Ukraine in a matter of weeks, if not days. That hasn't taken place. I heard firsthand during that first trip as the first member of Congress to travel in Ukraine subsequent to the war beginning. I heard from Ukrainian citizens, from military personnel, from political leaders, how the Ukrainian people were defending their homes, their cities, their national identity, which was so important, against Russia's war of aggression. I traveled from Krakow into Lviv, began to hear those testimonies, those stories, and see the initial impacts of the Russian invasion. Then traveled on a night train to Kyiv, and then went to the surrounding areas where war had broken out around Kyiv at that time. The opportunity to see the awesome power of Ukrainian forces on Russian military tanks blown up, remains of Russian soldiers still left by their comrades on the ground. To stand at Hostomel airfield and see the destruction, but also hear from the military I spoke with, as well as citizens, how the Russian people themselves kept crack troops of Russians from landing on that airfield and setting it up as the opportunity to fully invade and branch out in that war. And then to travel across the beautiful, beautiful, fertile grounds from Kyiv down to Odessa for my first time, shortly after the first missile had hit that apartment building, taking the life of a mother, infant daughter, and mother-in-law, while the husband had just left for a short period of time to go to the store before he came back. And to see that take place, and then the evening of that experience of going to meet with Odessan leadership, walk along the beautiful coastline, the shoreline, and then to spend the last part of my day in Odessa in a bomb shelter, singing along with Odessan musicians, Odessan folk songs. All of that brought to my attention the character of the citizens of Ukraine, of Odessa, and the Black Sea region. And that experience left an indelible impression in my mind as a member of Congress, going back and reporting what I had seen and heard and listened to in Ukraine. And so I'm glad to be back with you today to discuss the role of a country's economy and how it contributes to security. As the chairman of the House Education and Workforce Committee in the U.S. House, I'm a passionate believer that education is meant for the workforce, and a workforce that is educated can impact its country for centuries to come if we're willing to put the investment into that. Economies play a crucial role in the defense of a country. And though I believe and wish it was greater, one reason the U.S. has been able to provide assistance to Ukraine is thanks to our large and dynamic economy that can generate the resources needed to maintain our own readiness while also supporting our allies and partners. We've seen that most recently in the United States with Venezuela and Iran, what's going on there. Our long-term investments in national defense have enabled us to respond quickly, to provide direct aid, and to supply foreign military financing at moments when it's most needed. And I jump in here to say that I wish we would have been more rapid and full-throated with our own investments in Ukraine at the beginning of the war, as well as pushing our allies in Europe to do the same. But we are where we are, and so now we move on. Economies that are founded upon our shared democratic Western values also create an environment where innovation can flourish. And we've seen this innovation on full display in Ukraine. From that time in 2022 where I was here and had the opportunity to hold in my hands drones in the initial stages of drone technology for Ukraine, where they sought help from us to provide some of the resources needed to develop those drone capabilities, to their expert status now. Ukraine's expert status in that technology, where we have benefited the United States of America and our allied forces against Iran and its proxies in Iran at this time, with Ukraine coming in and giving us assets to enhance our efforts. What a change. But that came through both education, innovation, workforce development, and the ability to say we will find a way. The terrible war has forced the Ukraine armed forces to adapt rapidly, to develop and implement new technologies, and to rethink what modern defense looks like on the battlefield. In many ways, Ukraine has become a test bed for the future of security innovation that we've talked about today. The same values that drive this innovation can be harnessed to attract investment and assist in the effort to rebuild. A strong, resilient Ukrainian economy is essential to building and sustaining a lasting peace as it builds confidence among private investors, international partners, and the Ukrainian people. That's why initiatives like the U.S.-Ukraine Reconstruction Investment Fund are so important. This partnership supports the financing of critical infrastructure, energy products, and the development of strategic minerals, all sectors that will form the backbone of a revitalized Ukrainian economy and the benefit of the world. Investments like these not only help rebuild what has been destroyed, but also lay the groundwork for long-term growth and stability. As we look ahead, the world will continue to watch Ukraine's resilience and leadership. Your example reminds all of us that economic strength and national security are intertwined, and that when democracies stand together, grounded in shared values, they can overcome even the gravest challenges. Americans and their government officials will relearn this as we view Ukraine's victory. Thank you again for welcoming me back to Odessa. It's a privilege to stand with you, to learn from you, and to continue building a partnership that will help secure a peaceful and prosperous future for Ukraine and the free world. Slava Ukraine.
Once again, thank you very much, Congressman Walberg, for the opening of this part of our forum, and of course for the steady support that the United States Congress has shown to Ukraine in these critical years. Thank you so much. So let's move on to the discussion, and of course I'd like to invite all the participants on stage. But first of all, please welcome the moderator of this part of our economy panel, Mykola Davydiuk, Ukrainian political analyst, author, political commentator, and media voice. Please welcome.
Dear all, you know that the wars begin with the weapons of the past, but all the time the wars end with the technologies of the future. The same we may say about economy, and even more, in Ukrainian case, these technologies become a part of our economy and our innovative sector. Let's speak a little bit about economical transformation and future economy with my brilliant panelists. I wanted to invite to the stage Michael Gahler, a member of your European Parliament, Committee on Foreign Affairs, standing reporter on Ukraine. You're welcome, Michael. Dmytro Razumkov, member of Ukrainian Parliament, 14th chair of Verkhovna Rada, head of intelligent politics. Dalibor Rohac, senior fellow, American Enterprise Institute. And I wanted to welcome Brooks Newmark, chairman and co-founder of Trypillian. You're welcome. Michael, I would like to start from you. And you know that European economical model has shifted. The world's top 100 companies are no longer traditional industrial giants. But now they are startups, tech corporations, and platforms. What does this mean for Ukraine and Europe?
Well, first of all, I think we have to admit where we have had our deficits. And I would like to recall the year 2000 when we proclaimed a so-called Lisbon strategy, which had as objective to make the European Union in 2000, within 10 years, the most competitive, dynamic and knowledge-based economic space in the world. We have to admit we failed, to put it bluntly. We were, in 2010, we were not that. And still, I think we have managed to overcome the world economic crisis that started, I think, in 2008. We have managed to overcome the sovereign debt crisis, the euro crisis. We've had another crisis, the migratory crisis, and since 2014, the first step of the Russian invasion and then the full-scale war. So these were the one after the other crisis situations in which we were, and as I said, we have to admit we failed on this first objective, and we saw that in other parts of the world, indeed, we have seen that these new technologies have developed quicker. Now, I think we have, on the one hand, learned the lesson, and this dreadful war has not only pushed us towards more need to invest in defense, but actually to roll over and to make our single market, our setup, indeed more competitive. And we have engaged in this since 2024 with a new majority in the European Parliament, with a new European Commission. We are, as we speak, active in reviewing existing legislation to cut red tape, to abolish where possible unnecessary regulatory things, to abolish and facilitate reporting duties for enterprises, all issues that have led to a situation where we are not the most attractive site where to invest. Now, I think definitely the huge development of AI and the pressure that comes through the need to invest far more in defense have accelerated this situation, and also the experience how a country in a war situation manages to survive, to cope with the challenges that come with that. So the most extreme situation that you can think of, and now and still your economy, especially of course the war-related one, shows the level of creativity, of rapidness, of ability to adapt to almost daily changing situation. That should serve for us as a positive example how to cope with a rapidly changing situation. And as I said, we are in extreme high amount of legislation. We call it omnibus regulations, where we take from existing regulations and directive, we take individual norms and put them into an kind of an omnibus in a overall legislation in different economic areas, and that is, as we speak, being voted in the parliament to make things quicker, simpler, and more attractive to invest. And I think we are now, especially of course in the sector of defense legislation and innovation and investment, we are including in full scale Ukraine in the programs. So both for the SAFE program, that is a 150 billion credit program for member states to invest more in defense. There it is explicitly said that Ukraine can be fully made part. So if you invest and have a Ukrainian partner, it's fully eligible to profit, this company, from this cooperation with Ukraine in other areas as well in the single market. We are, so to say, taking this opportunity to anticipate already something that would normally only apply to member states, and I think that is what also serves your purpose. And I'm confident that under the pressure that we are in, and then comes, of course, the trade issues, where our American friends are as they are, we take note, and that is why we are actively pursuing free trade agreements with other parts of the world. Mercosur is provisionally active. We have concluded something with India. We have it running for 5 years already with Canada, with huge effects. We have done something just now, upgraded it with Mexico. We have others. We are finished it with New Zealand. We are finalizing with Australia, and it has been signed. So that is our part of a rules-based order. We want a global situation where the rules-based order prevails, and not that 2 or 3 big ones can unilaterally decide. So that is our answer to a Trumpist trade agenda. We are willing to become partners in the world, and not some who are putting something on other partners unilaterally. We are for partnership and not for unilateralism.
Thank you so much. Mr. Newmark, the next question for you. I would like to ask you that for years the world has predicted that imminent the collapse of Russian economy, yet it has not happened. Putin's resilience seems to rest not on tanks or missiles, but on his economic bloc, which has kept the system stable and even sometimes generated growth in the real sector. What does this tell us about a modern statecraft and about the limits of Western economic pressure?
Thank you for that question. I think the problem is that sanctions don't work, and that we may say that we're not buying energy, but I think most European countries are buying European energy. The United States is buying nuclear, effectively capability for their nuclear energy and so on. So Putin, effectively, his war is not being funded by the internal economy, it's being funded by the external economy, because we are not doing what we said that we would do. And until Europe and until the West understands that, it's a problem. We don't, added to that, it's very difficult to lecture countries like India, for example, and telling them not to buy energy when we then go and buy the energy or refined energy from them. So I think the sort of question is, leads to the sort of solution that sanctions don't work. Secondly, I think the internal economy is really collapsing. It's a very dysfunctional economy. It always has been a dysfunctional economy that's kept alive really by the energy sector. The people who benefit in Russia is a very, very thin amount of people. And before the war, I spent a considerable time there, and the poverty is terrible. And I think the sort of jokes of Russian soldiers coming into Ukrainian homes to steal toilets is pretty much an image that's always stuck with me. So I think this resilience comes in the fact that they have been enabled, if not abetted, by the West, who has not done what they said that they would do, which is to put severe sanctions on Russia. So what is the alternative? The alternative is doing what the Ukrainian military is doing now, which is hitting refineries, hitting energy depots, hitting infrastructure that is going to prevent Putin from actually leveraging off that as both an economic tool and a military tool. So I think, after 3 years plus of the West not giving Ukraine the weapons it needed to hit things like refineries and energy depots and so on, finally Ukraine has once again had to come up with its own solution to the problem because of the lack of support in the West in providing them the long-distance weapons that they've needed. So, Ukraine, I am an eternal optimist. I've been here really since the first few weeks of the war. I've been here for 4 years now. And, I have to say, I am very optimistic about Ukraine, particularly, I'm not going to make a judgment when the war is going to end, but when the war ends, I'm very optimistic. And my advice to Ukraine would be, and I know I've been given 5 minutes, so I'll use one more minute, is sort of, it will need a Marshall Plan, right? Some form of Marshall Plan. And one of the lessons I would say, and my neighbor here on the left would say, a typical Brit, is do not do what Europe does, which is highly overregulated, highly taxed, and cannot make decisions. So I would recommend a much more free market entrepreneurial spirit, which we have seen in the whole drone sector. What we have seen is the free market at work, allowing individuals to thrive. So the European Union solution is not a model, and at least it's been acknowledged that having had a 10-year plan, it has unfortunately failed. I think Ukraine has to follow a very different path. And if we look, and let me give it a small example of Estonia. Estonia is a tiny country, but Estonia has got e-government incredibly efficiently. Ukraine is now bringing in more and more electronic government, which is great. But they have, 11 unicorns in a tiny country. Imagine how many unicorns can be created here in Ukraine after the war. So the solution for me is threefold. First of all, you have to rebuild your infrastructure. The second thing you have to do, for me, and the thing that's really impressed me, is the impact women have had on this war. There have been so many women on the front line and so on. Women will have an increasingly important frontline role in this country. In a way, I spent a lot of time in Rwanda. 50-60% of the parliament in Rwanda is female. You look at your parliament today, there are a lot of very strong, powerful women. And I think women, once they come back from the front, will want an increasingly important role here. And the third thing I would say, and goes back to what Congressman Walberg said, is education. You have young children here, and I'm still at my old age doing a PhD in education. One of the things is children today have missed out 6 years of proper education, 2 years of COVID, followed by 4 years of this war. And so I think trying to make up for that and trying to deal with that will give you the software, the intellectual software you will need to thrive as a country. And I think my final piece of advice, because I want to give this, is when the country is rebuilt, it must not be rebuilt from the center down. It must not be rebuilt from the west east. It has to be rebuilt from the village up and from the east to the west. Otherwise, you will create effectively two societies once again, which will then lead to social unrest, maybe not in 5 or 10 years, but certainly 20 years, and you will then end up with a Trumpian, Putin-like character taking advantage of that, which you don't want. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Newmark. Dalibor, the next question to you. Do sanctions actually work? And what should Europe be prepared to do if the United States one day decide to ultimately lift its sanction on Russia?
I think those are great questions. I would venture to argue that sanctions do work, but just we have to do them properly, and we have to be committed to to the political end goal of defeating Putin in Ukraine. We have to be serious about them. We also have to be serious about building large international alliances that enable us to enforce sanctions. And I think that's been one of the biggest failures of the Western response, that we really had very little to offer to the Indias, Indonesias, Brazils of the world in 2022 in exchange for their joining our broad coalition aiming to defeat Putin in Ukraine. I don't want to speculate too much about what happens if the United States bails completely on sanctions enforcement. Obviously, the European Union, the UK, other countries are in a position to enforce primary sanctions. The problem would be with secondary sanctions enforcement. That's where the US dollar and the US financial system are central. I think the important thing is really to keep the current battlefield momentum going and use the opportunities that we have to bring this to an end. And I think I would like to make sort of 3 points about Ukraine's own economic health that are related to this, for why I think it is important to try to bring Putin's defeat on the battlefield sooner rather than later. The first point I want to make is that what Ukraine has achieved from an economic standpoint is really remarkable. I mean, you have a country that is in its 4th year of war, a country that lost 1/5 of its GDP the first year of the war. I remember being here in 2022, you walk to an ATM, you get money from an ATM. Everything works, all the private markets work, you get food, there are no shortages. You have a sort of well-functioning private economy despite all the hardship. You now have increasingly macroeconomic stability, so the inflation rate is now closer to the central bank's target. You have a banking system that's resilient. You have a hryvnia that's, broadly speaking, stable against the dollar. And I think it is the fact that the IMF just approved another tranche of assistance. I think it all sort of points to a track record that's very impressive. And I think the most important part of this track record is the fact that Ukraine has never had recourse to what we typically think of as wartime command economy. I think that's a major achievement, that the private sector has been kind of left intact. You never had price controls, you never had major nationalizations, you didn't have the sort of industrial planning that typically comes in wartime during times of total war. And it is so critical that you don't do that, because otherwise you risk falling into the trap that, I'm sorry to say to my British colleague, the UK fell into in the Second World War and its aftermath, where the sort of legacy of these wartime economic controls contributed to the gap that formed in the 50s, 60s, and 70s between the UK and the continental economies that were growing at much faster rates. So that's one reason why I think it's important for Ukraine to finish Putin off sooner rather than later. It's also because obviously the current model of macroeconomic stability has an expiration date. I mean, it is dependent after all on outside funding. We have the 90 billion loan. €1 billion loan from the European Union that gets Ukraine through next year, but there'll be many important elections in EU countries next year. I think the kind of political economy of helping Ukraine might get more complicated going forward. That's why I think it's important to use this momentum. Finally, going forward, looking beyond the war, I very much agree with Brooke on the importance of learning from the experience of the tech defense sector and trying to bring that model to the wider economy. Because Ukraine, I think it would be a mistake to think of Ukraine's reconstruction as some return to the pre-war past. I think we have to look into the future, look at what works, use these innovations to translate them into scalable businesses. And for that, Ukraine will need some obvious things. It will need to reverse the unfavorable demographic trends that have been exacerbated by the war. It needs to invest into human capital. It needs to strengthen its own institutions. That's where I think the EU accession process is going to be really helpful, really important. But I think more fundamentally, it will also need to strengthen its financial infrastructure. So if you want to have a vibrant, growing economy with unicorns and scalable businesses, you can't rely on bank finance alone. You have to do what the Nordic countries have done, what Estonia has done. You have to build kind of really thick, well-functioning capital markets, and Ukraine is very far from that at this moment. And there are many reasons for that. One of them is the structure of the tax code. The so-called simplified tax regime encourages businesses to stay small, in fact encourages businesses to split to avoid VAT compliance. So I think that there's sort of area of reform that will be very important, which is to sort of make sure that there are incentives facing businesses to scale up and grow, and that there is private capital that can be channeled towards sort of high risk, high reward projects. That's how Ukraine becomes a really vibrant startup nation.
Mr. Rohac, thank you so much. My next question to Dmytro Razumkov. What economy future are we building for Ukraine?
Ну, насправді потужні або великі, або успішні країни – це не про виживання людей, це про їх розвиток і будівництво майбутнього. Це країни, які не про економіку заради економіки, не про будівництво заради будівництва. Це про можливість розвиватись, жити свободно, вільно, успішно і досягати тих цілей, які прагне суспільство, яке живе в цих країнах. Насправді Україна сьогодні знаходиться на роздоріжжі. Є два варіанти, якщо закінчується війна, або навіть якщо вона сьогодні не закінчується, або почати відновлювати те, що було до повномасштабного вторгнення, або будувати інакшу економіку. Я впевнений, якщо ми підемо по першому шляху, це шлях в нікуди, це шлях, який приведе нас лише до занепаду і не дасть можливість не лише не відбудувати країну, а й створити умови, куди б повернулися б люди з-за кордону, де б хотіли жити наші з вами діти, де хотіли б жити ми. Тому, якщо ми говоримо про економіку нашої держави, ми маємо визначити для себе пріоритетні галузі, на яких ми будемо будувати своє майбутнє. Перш за все, я б сконцентрувався на промисловості. Немає успішних країн в світі, в яких немає промисловості. Це те, що створює додану вартість, це те, що створює нові робочі місця, це те, що називається реальним сектором економіки, і без цього будувати успішну, ефективну економіку держави Україна буде неможливо. Другий важливий аспект – це енергетика. Сьогодні вона одна з найбільш пошкоджених галузей нашої економіки, але саме завдяки її відбудові і розвитку ми можемо отримати нові можливості і для себе, як для держави Україна, і для наших європейських партнерів. Тому що в нас є всі базові задатки для того, щоб досягнути цього. Перш за все, в нас достатньо серйозно розвинута атомна енергетика. Плюс нам є куди розвиватися, йти не тим шляхом, який пропонувала влада, закуповувати атомні блоки для Хмельницької АЕС, які є російськими, які знаходяться в Болгарії, а залучити інвесторів зі Сполучених Штатів Америки, залучити інвесторів з Європейського Союзу і дійсно розвиватися в цьому напрямку, тому що атомна енергетика – це зелена енергетика, як би нам сьогодні це не хотілося, або ми не слухали ті страшилки, які сьогодні лунають в бік цього напрямку. Друге, в нас серйозні потужності щодо зеленої енергетики, сонячної, вітрової енергетики, і саме це дозволить зайти сюди інвестору, тому що жодний інвестор не готовий буде зайти в країну, інвестувати в країну, якщо він буде розуміти, що немає вільних енергетичних потужностей для їх підприємств. Повертаємося до промисловості в тому числі. Наступний важливий аспект – це те, в чому Україна є, я вважаю, однією з найбільш успішних країн в світі станом на сьогодні – це наша з вами оборонка. Саме завдяки тим технологічним, інноваційним, проривним рішенням, які є сьогодні, ми можемо зайняти одне з найуспішніших місць в не лише розробці, продажу, інвестуванні, але й розповсюдженні нашої з вами оборонної, в першу чергу, зброї. Ми платимо за це величезну ціну. Ми кожного дня втрачаємо людей на фронті. І саме там ми бачимо ті плюси і мінуси, які сьогодні має цей сектор. І повірте мені, маючи таких сусідів, як Росія, або інші країни світу, на жаль, їх також вистачає. Якщо ви не будете мати серйозні механізми захисту, то завтра війська цих країн будуть знаходитись на вашій території, а ви будете втрачати своїх військових, своїх цивільних, дітей, своє майбутнє. Ще одна з ключових галузей, якою славилась завжди Україна, це є аграрна промисловість. Я категорично проти того, що нам сьогодні пропонується, коли говорять, давайте знову Україна стане країною, яка буде сирйовою базою, сировинною базою для країн світу. Ви будете інвестувати свою пшеницю, свою кукурудзу, рапс тощо. Це хороший варіант, але, дякую, не для нашої з вами держави. Якщо ми хочемо мати успіх, ми маємо мати тут глибоку переробку. Маємо створювати нові потужності, які будуть давати додану вартість, які будуть забезпечувати нові робочі місця, які будуть приносити додаткові прибутки населенню, державі і виходити на новий рівень потужності нашої держави. У нас для цього все є, особливо якщо ми зможемо нормально відкрити ті торгові шляхи, які сьогодні існують в Україні, але частково або повністю заблоковані ворогом, в тому числі там сама Одеса або Одеський регіон, який сьогодні не може працювати наповно, хоча має всі можливості і всі потенціали. Одним з найважливіших аспектів є створення умов для того, щоб повернути в Україну людей, які знаходяться за кордоном, і утримати тут тих, хто сьогодні знаходиться на теренах нашої з вами держави. Це не людський ресурс, це людський капітал, і ми маємо це пам'ятати. Якщо ми будемо сприймати українців як ресурс, ми з вами втратимо найголовніше, на чому і будуть базуватися всі ті галузі, про які я тільки що говорив. Ми маємо зробити умови для того, щоб поверталися сюди українці. Той шлях, який сьогодні лунає або тестується для суспільства, що давайте запросимо сюди іноземців, запросимо сюди іммігрантів. Це в тих умовах, які є сьогодні, непрацюючий варіант. Він може призвести до зміни тих умов, які сьогодні існують в Україні, і зруйнувати ту базу, яка сьогодні ще залишається в Україні. І якщо ми говоримо про залучення іммігрантів, ми в першу чергу мали б думати про те, як їх залучити до лав Збройних сил України, вивільнивши своїх громадян для того, щоб вони почали вже сьогодні відбудовувати нашу економіку. Але все це не зможе існувати на теренах країни. Ми не зможемо залучити інвесторів, ми не зможемо розвиватися, якщо тут не буде верховенства права, якщо тут не буде демократії, якщо тут не буде свободи слова, якщо тут не буде тих принципів, по яким живе вільна Європа, Сполучені Штати Америки, інші країни світу, на яких ми маємо рівнятися і які є сьогодні дійсно надійними партнерами нашої держави.
Дякую, Дмитро Олександрович. 2-3 minutes to each speaker. And my next question to Mr. Gahler. Russian metallurgy is still not banned in European Union. Around $2 billion a year continues to be paid to Russian suppliers who happen to be part of Putin's inner circle and so-called Russian oligarchs. How can we push European Union to finally close its market to them? What do you think about that?
Well, indeed, we have a situation where certain goods reach, on the one hand, reach Russia and by bypassing and circumventing the sanctions, and there are still not all goods that come from Russia are banned from getting imported. And in this regard, especially my institution, the Parliament, has always pushed for more and for more comprehensive sanctions, and of course strengthening the instruments for circumventing that. I'm personally very much in favor of these secondary sanctions against countries. We have invented, it was in 23, an instrument that looks a bit in this direction. It was activated the first time against Kyrgyzstan now within the framework of the 20th sanction package, because we found that they have persistently let it happen that goods were transferred to them and then further transferred to Russia. But in my mind, the best way to address it, to avoid that these things happen, simply our export agencies who authorize exports in certain countries, they have the statistics and they know which precise goods have been sent to Russia up till 22 and not in other countries. And if now whatever good you can think of has been exported to Russia up until they were sanctioned, and nothing of that ended up in Kyrgyzstan, in Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, or in Turkey, and all of a sudden the same thing ends up there, although it never went there, then it's clear where it's ending up and finally. So my point is to say that these agencies should turn around for the exporter the burden of proof that it actually does not end up in Russia, but the presumption, there's no presumption of innocence, but the presumption of circumvention. And unless this exporter cannot really prove that it is something for something designed in the country X, then he should not get the permission to export. I think that is the best way, and it does not immediately directly touch this country, but the exporter, who is the one who knows where it actually ends up because he earlier exported it to Russia. So I think that should be a proper way of avoiding that. And for the other goods that are still imported from Russia, we must definitely find the way out. I mean, for oil and gas, we have the phasing out by the end of next year for those who still have it. And for other goods like potash or other fertilizers, the fact that the Hormuz is closed now, and apparently I wasn't aware that Qatar apparently produces a lot of fertilizer through this oil that they have, that there might be a shortage of fertilizer should not be an argument to import things more from Russia.
Thank you, Mr. Gahler, and for your answer and also for your job what you're doing in European Parliament. Thank you. Mr. Newmark, here in Odessa we know that UK is a Ukrainian neighbor without whom we don't have a border, but we have a fantastic partnership. And could I ask you, may we meet one day in European Union? What I mean, a lot of gossips and political speculation that UK may beg, or to say, is it possible make Great Britain European Union again? And also when you estimate when Ukraine may join European Union?
Well, my first recommendation is maybe the greatest asset perhaps we could bring in, import into Ukraine and export from the UK perhaps as Boris Johnson. And I'm sure he would be a great asset to Ukraine. I think as somebody who felt that the European Union was sort of over-regulated, overtaxed and so on, and supported us leaving the European Union, I certainly wouldn't suggest either we go back into it. But what I do think we need is a strong economic relationship with the EU. I think the shortcomings of the EU for people like myself were the political controls and constraints and regulations on a political level. On an economic level, I've always believed we should have some sort of EFTA-EEA relationship. And my advice to Ukraine, and it's an incredibly entrepreneurial society that has escaped the constraints of a Soviet, top-down approach, which the EU is a light version of that, is Soviet light, in its top-down approach. My view would be, rather than wanting to sort of get into the EU, you want an economic relationship with the EU. And I would work towards having a sort of Norwegian approach like EFTA, or a Swiss approach like the EEA would be a much better approach for you, because that would allow you to have the political freedom that you want, to pursue what you want politically. That's in the best interest of Ukraine, while having the economic benefits of a large trading bloc.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Dalibor, we have no time, but like I wanted to ask you, how could you describe a future cooperation among Ukraine and United States? And speaking about mineral deal, drones partnership, and many other scopes of economy.
First of all, I'm in a strange position as a neocon from Washington who is going to defend the honor of the EU in the following sense. So I would agree with many of the criticisms directed at the EU, but at the same time, I think it should give us pause that EU membership is compatible with many different economic models, and some of the most lightly regulated and most flexible economies are in countries that are member states of the EU. At the same time, the UK left the European Union and has since done very little to make its own markets more flexible, to make it easier to start businesses, to build up.
It's because we have a Labour government.
So sometimes the EU get blamed for failures of national governments in ways that are not helpful. With regard to the Ukraine-US relationship, I think a lot hinges on the path that the United States itself chooses to play on the international stage in the years to come. Yes, there are some areas in which kind of any rational administration would pursue joint projects, joint ventures, cooperation. It would be in the U.S. interest to learn from the Ukrainian way of war, from drone warfare, the minerals deal, cooperation in energy. These are things that would be conceivably pursued by a Democratic or Republican administration. The big question, though, is whether the United States will be able to sort of commit to Ukraine in a deeper way that would perhaps one day might even lead to Ukraine's accession to NATO, which was a live question not so long ago, and that is really a question for American voters, for American political elites. We are going through a very turbulent period in U.S. politics. I've been on the side of those who argue that a deep, intimate relationship with Ukraine should be part and parcel of America's role on the global stage. But that is very much a sort of ongoing battle in the court of public opinion.
Thank you so much. І, власне, останнє запитання, пане Дмитре, до вас. Які перспективи ви бачите України в Європейському Союзі? Прошу.
Я все ж таки тоді про економіку, перспективи України в економіці Європейського Союзу. У нас гарні запитання стоять. Кінець гри, endgame, і від пішака до королеви або до ферзя. Це, мабуть, одні з ключових запитань, які сьогодні стоять перед Україною. Відповідаючи на перше, ні, це не кінець гри. Це лише початок, і від нас всіх залежить, наскільки ця гра буде успішною і як швидко ми в ній переможемо. Те, що ми в ній переможемо, я в цьому впевнений. А от друге запитання від пішака до королеви або ферзя. Пішак може залишатися на дошці фігурою, якою будуть грати. Пішак може стати розмінною монетою або розмінною фігурою, яку віддають під бой, і потім за неї забувають. Україна не може собі дозволити стати пішаком. Україна має пройти інший шлях, який за правилами гри є у пішака. Це пройти важке випробування, дійти до кінця дошки і стати ферзем. Стати тією фігурою, яка найсильніша на дошці, має найбільший потенціал, найбільші можливості і найбільш цінується іншими гравцями і грейсмейстерами, які управляють цими фігурами на полі. Тому саме це має бути ключовою задачею для нас – пройти ті випробування, які є сьогодні, які будуть завтра, стати ферзем і все ж таки з фігури перетворитися на гравця і грейсмейстера і вигравати далі наше успішне майбутнє, за яке ми сьогодні всі боремось. Дякую вам, дякую за запрошення, дякую колегам по панелі і модератору, як завжди.
Дуже дякую вам. Dear participants, thank you so much. Thank you for your answers and for your time. Thank you.